Beep. My card swiped once, then again. I was standing at the checkout counter in a Plano mall in Texas, surrounded by the mixed scents of cinnamon candles and coffee. But even as I handed over my own card, I couldn't lift my head. A girl with no family, spending our money like this, my mother-in-law, Carol said. And the tears I'd been holding back rose to my eyes. But I swallowed them down one more time. Holiday music and laughter filled the air, yet my heart kept dropping. And I felt like I was the cheapest thing in that whole house. I kept enduring it, slowly crumbling inside, and feeling even more lonely. Because I had no one on my side. Why the tears that started at that mall checkout in Texas ended up turning our whole family upside down. I'll tell you from here on. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. The sound of doors opening, the rush of winter scents. Cinnamon and coffee mingled in the air, tickling my nose. I followed my mother-in-law Carol into the upscale shopping mall in Plano, north of Dallas, Texas. It was holiday sale season, so every store was packed with people. And Christmas carols played through the ceiling speakers. Carol walked quickly. I followed behind her, passing display after display. She stopped in front of the coat section and said, "Emily, look at that coat, perfect for Dan." I nodded and glanced at the price tag. $480. Nearly half my monthly rent. Carol picked up the coat, examining it from all angles, then headed to the checkout. I followed. While the cashier scanned the barcode, Carol glanced my way and said, "Get your wallet out, you have a card, right? You're part of our family now, you can afford this once in a while." Her voice didn't sound like a question. It sounded like a command. I rummaged through my purse, calculating quickly in my head. This month's electric bill hadn't come yet, and my credit card payment was due in just a few days. But I couldn't refuse. People around us were watching, and Carol's eyes had already decided the answer. With trembling hands, I pulled out my card and handed it to the cashier. That's when it happened. Carol turned to the cashier and said, "She's a girl with no family. We practically raised her ourselves. But as a daughter-in-law, she should be able to do this much, right?" The cashier tried to smile awkwardly. A customer standing nearby glanced at me, and I lowered my head. My throat burned hot. I could feel my ears turning red. As the cashier handed me the receipt, I took the paper and crumpled it into my purse. My hands were shaking. Carol asked them to put the rewards points under her name, then. As we left the store, she threw out another comment. "I should probably give this coat to Mike later, it would suit him better." All the way to the parking lot, I couldn't say a word. Even as I got in the car and buckled my seatbelt, Carol stared out the window, muttering to herself about her next shopping plans. I sat in the passenger seat, my fingers touching the crumpled receipt in my purse. On Highway 635, the vast Texas sky stretched outside the car window. Cold winter sunlight beat down, and I turned my head away from the light. A girl with no family. Those words kept echoing in my ears. I'd heard them when I lived in foster care, when I stayed at the group home. Always the same words. Tears welled up, but I held them back, afraid Carol might see me in the rearview mirror. I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. The car drove toward our townhouse in Addison, and I stared blankly at the passing scenery outside. When we arrived home, the moment I opened the front door, I saw my father-in-law Tom rising from the living room. I stood by the shoe rack with my purse still on my shoulder, trying to take off my shoes, when Tom looked at my face and asked in a low voice, "Emily, who said something to you again?" I couldn't look up, afraid he'd see my reddened eyes. I stood facing away from him toward the shoe rack, but my voice trembled. "Dad, I think I need to leave here." With those words, I went into my room and closed the door. Even lying in bed, the scene at the mall checkout kept replaying in my mind. Carol's voice, people's stares, the trembling card in my hand, and the crumpled receipt. I took the receipt out of my purse and unfolded it. $480. Money paid by a daughter-in-law with no family. That night, I looked out the window and cried quietly. I covered my mouth with the blanket to keep from making noise. The Texas night sky was full of stars, but inside my heart, everything was dark. Night deepened. In the living room, football game highlights played quietly on the television. I sat on the sofa, hugging my knees. My husband Dan had already gone to the bedroom and turned off the lights. And my father-in-law was resting in his room. The living room, with just me left in it, was quiet. Only the sound of the clock ticking. What happened at the mall today kept coming back to me. A girl with no family. Those words wouldn't leave my ears. I remembered my childhood. Christmas spent in foster care, sitting alone on the living room sofa. Watching other children open presents. Even then, I felt this way. Here but not belonging. I remembered last Thanksgiving dinner. Laura, the older daughter-in-law, had said, "We're so busy." Going back and forth between my in-laws and my parents. She'd said it while glancing down at me. That look was still vivid. I had nowhere to go, so of course I was here. I went to the kitchen and started washing dishes. Plunging my hands into cold water brought me back a little. As I washed the plates, I whispered to myself, why am I always the one standing at the checkout? Paying with my money, hurting inside, and still unable to say anything. I finished the dishes and was drying my hands. When my husband opened the bedroom door slightly. Tough day today, huh? I have an early meeting tomorrow, going to bed. Then he went back into the room. I hung the damp towel on the sink and sighed. The next morning, I stayed home. My father-in-law had gone with Carol to the farmer's market. Near the church to shop. I sat by the living room window. Trying to read a book, but the words wouldn't focus. Time passed, and it was afternoon when the front door finally opened. My father-in-law came in first, and Carol followed behind with grocery bags. I got up and went to the kitchen to help put things away. Carol opened the refrigerator door and said, "Emily was crying again at the mall yesterday. She's so sensitive, that girl." I stopped moving, holding a bag of tomatoes. My father-in-law said nothing. I put the bag in the vegetable drawer and quietly asked, "Mom, am I being too sensitive?" Carol turned to look at me and laughed. "Oh, why are you like that? It was just a comment. Don't take things so seriously." That evening, I went to my room and lay on the bed. My husband was in the living room watching television. I stared at the ceiling and thought, am I being too sensitive? Or have I just endured too much? Night came. Unable to sleep, I got out of bed and stood by the window. Outside the Addison townhouse, the streetlights flickered dimly. Then from the hallway, I heard Carol's voice. Low and quiet, but it seeped through the door crack. "The inheritance is all arranged for Mike's side. Don't touch the younger son's share." Her voice was firm. I leaned closer to the door. I couldn't hear my father-in-law's response. I slowly went back to bed and pulled up the covers. My heart felt heavy. My husband and I lived in this house without paying rent. But now I understood it wasn't really for us. I closed my eyes but couldn't sleep. Is endurance also a sin? That question circled in my mind. The next afternoon, I sat in a cafe near downtown Dallas. With a latte in front of me, I opened the Notes app on my phone. My finger hovered over the screen. Moving out, separation, divorce counseling. I typed those words, but I didn't have the courage to actually do anything about them. A notification appeared on my phone. It was a credit card payment notification. $480, Plano Premium Mall. I looked down at the screen and sighed. Calculating this month's rent and electric bill made my head spin. I left the cafe and walked toward the bus stop. The sun was harsh but the wind was cold. On my way home, I opened the mailbox, and there was a thick envelope inside. A bank statement. The envelope had both my father-in-law's and my husband's names on it. I stopped. My fingers played with the envelope, then slowly opened it. Inside was an account statement. I saw the balance, and on the next line, an item that said online transfer. The receiving account name was Michael Mitchell, the older son. I was about to put the envelope in my purse when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I looked up to see my father-in-law standing there. He must have been out shopping, holding a small paper bag in his hand. My father-in-law looked at the envelope in my hand and quietly said, "Emily, can we sit for a minute?" I nodded, and we walked to a nearby park bench. When we sat down, my father-in-law spoke first. "Seeing you come home crying yesterday, I felt truly ashamed." I looked at my father-in-law. His face was full of weariness. He continued, "Can you tell me what happened at the mall?" I hesitated for a while. Then slowly told him everything that had happened that day. What Carol said, people's stares, the shame I felt. Everything. My father-in-law listened silently. I took out the crumpled receipt from my purse and showed it to him. He took the receipt and looked down at it for a long time. I could see his hand trembling slightly. My father-in-law said, "Emily, from now on, let's document what happens to you. Record it if you need to, save everything." My eyes widened. He took out my phone and opened the voice recording app himself. "Use this. If anyone says anything to you from now on, save it all." Right then, my phone rang. It was Carol. I looked at my father-in-law, and he nodded. I answered, and Carol's voice came through. "Emily, let's go to the bank today, you just need to sign something." Her voice sounded casual as always. After I hung up, my father-in-law said in a low voice, "Let's look at those documents together today. Don't run away. Protect your life first." I nodded. I felt something moving inside my chest. Not fear, but determination. That afternoon, I went home and into my room. I unfolded the crumpled receipt again. And checked that the recording app was installed on my phone. This isn't about running away, I told myself. This is about fighting back. Today was the day to go to the bank. Carol had been rushing around since morning, packing her bag. "Emily, hurry up and get ready, we need to get there before the bank closes." I put on my coat and went to the front door. My father-in-law said he was coming too, holding his truck keys. On the drive, the Texas suburban landscape passed by the car window. We could see a shopping strip mall, and Carol said, "There's the bank." My father-in-law pulled into the parking lot. As we entered the bank, the air conditioning felt cold. Carol walked straight to the counter and handed documents to the clerk. I followed, and Carol pressed a pen into my hand. "You just need to sign here, it's simple." I started reading the top of the document slowly. Rental property, title transfer. It meant real estate ownership transfer. But something was strange. My husband Dan's name wasn't anywhere on the document. Only the older son Mike's name was written there. I looked up at Carol. "Mom, what is this document for?" Carol answered with an irritated voice. "Oh, don't worry about it. We're just arranging things for Mike's house mortgage. It's for our whole family." Then she pressed the pen harder into my hand. I held the pen and looked at the document again. In the counter's glass window, I could see my father-in-law's reflection. He was sitting in a chair farther away, pretending to read a newspaper, but his eyes were directed this way. I didn't sign. Instead, I pushed the document back to Carol. "Mom, I can't sign this today. I want to talk to my husband first." Carol's face hardened, but she couldn't make a scene in front of the bank clerk. She just clicked her tongue and gathered up the papers. As we walked to the parking lot after leaving the bank, Carol didn't say a word. My father-in-law got in the driver's seat, and I got in the back. The air inside the car was heavy. On the way home, when Carol got out of the car briefly to take a call, my father-in-law looked at me in the rearview mirror and whispered quietly, "Remember the date and title owner name from those documents?" I nodded. That afternoon, my father-in-law went out alone. When I asked where he was going, he said he had business at the county office. I stayed home and washed dishes while I waited. My father-in-law came back around sunset. He was holding a document envelope in his hand. I followed him to a corner of the living room, and he opened the envelope to show me. It was property records obtained from the Dallas County Clerk's office. The documents showed that the rental house, that had been jointly owned by my father-in-law, had already been transferred to sole ownership under the older son Mike's name. The date was several months ago. At the bottom of the document was a handwritten note that said pre-inheritance arrangement. I looked at the documents, speechless. My father-in-law's hand was trembling slightly. He muttered lowly, "This isn't right. This crossed the line." That night, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. When I opened it, my father-in-law handed me the document envelope. "Emily, let's look at this together. Starting tomorrow, you need to stand firm in your place." I took the envelope and nodded. That night, I spread out the documents and stared at them for a long time. Neither my name nor my husband's name was on them. But now I knew. This wasn't about running away. This was about fighting. My father-in-law was on my side. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. My father-in-law was putting on his coat and told Carol, "Going to get the truck serviced." Carol was in the kitchen, drinking coffee, and answered casually, "Okay, be careful." I watched from the living room. As my father-in-law walked out the front door, our eyes met. He nodded slightly, and I quietly bowed my head. He seemed to have some plan. Several hours passed. Even when lunchtime came, my father-in-law hadn't returned. Carol didn't seem to care much, but I felt anxious. What if something had happened to him? I worried alone. It was afternoon when I finally heard the front door open. My father-in-law had returned. His expression was different from usual. It was the face of someone who had accomplished something. He went to the kitchen, drank a glass of water, and glanced at me with a nod. I followed my father-in-law to the backyard. The winter wind was cold, but he pulled his phone out of his jacket pocket. "Emily, look at this." He turned on the screen and showed me. It was a video. On the screen was the mall checkout from a few days ago. Carol and I were standing there, and the cashier was scanning barcodes. Then Carol's voice played. "A girl with no family draining our money." I watched the screen, breathless. My father-in-law said quietly, "I went to the mall customer service today." I looked up at him. "How did you get this?" My father-in-law spoke slowly. "I went to customer service and told them my daughter-in-law cried a lot. I asked if I could check the footage, and the employee showed it to me. I couldn't get a copy, but I could record it with my phone like this." Tears came to my eyes. I couldn't believe my father-in-law had gone all the way to the mall for me. He patted my shoulder gently and said, "Emily, this is proof that you're not overreacting." Sitting on the backyard bench, my father-in-law showed me the phone screen again. The time and date were clearly captured, and Carol's words were clear. I watched the screen, feeling warmth in my chest. My father-in-law said, "And we have the property records from the county yesterday. Now we have 2 pieces of evidence." I nodded. "But what will you do with this?" My father-in-law thought for a moment, then said firmly, "At the next family dinner, I'm going to reveal everything. I'll call Mike and Laura, and I'll discuss this in front of the whole family." I asked in surprise, "Won't you have a big fight with Mom?" My father-in-law sighed. "It's not a fight, it's making things right. I'm old now. After I die, it will be harder for you all. We need to fix this now." I squeezed my father-in-law's hand tightly. "Thank you, Dad." That evening, I sat in my room looking at my phone and thinking. I couldn't believe my father-in-law had gone to the mall to secure that footage. I could never have done it alone. But no, I wasn't alone. The next day, my father-in-law called the older son Mike. "Everyone should gather this weekend, I have something to discuss." Mike asked what it was about, but my father-in-law just said to come. I heard the call from the kitchen. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what would happen. But at least I knew I didn't have to stay silent anymore. My father-in-law was standing by my side. Sunday evening approached. The sound of dishes clinking came from the kitchen. I wiped down the table and checked the clock. The older son's family would arrive soon. The doorbell rang. Carol rushed to the front door and called out cheerfully, "Mike, Laura, come in." "How are the kids?" The older son's family came into the living room, and the children ran to the sofa. Food was laid out on the dining table. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole. It was a dinner Carol had proudly prepared. Everyone sat down, and Carol began talking as usual. "Mike's house is paying off the mortgage nicely now. And the kids are so smart, you wouldn't believe it." I just pushed around the salad on my plate. My husband Dan, sitting next to me, was also quiet. The atmosphere seemed to be loosening a bit. When my father-in-law suddenly put down his fork, my father-in-law stood up and walked toward the living room. He came back a moment later, holding a remote control and his phone. He turned on the television and started connecting his phone. Carol asked, "Honey, what are you doing?" Instead of answering, my father-in-law turned on the screen. The mall checkout appeared on the television. My image and Carol's were visible. The air in the room instantly became heavy. The video played. Carol's voice flowed through the living room speakers. "A girl with no family draining our money." In that moment, everyone seemed to stop breathing. Mike and Laura's faces hardened, and even the children became quiet. I clasped both hands tightly on my knees. I put down my fork. On the screen, my image hung my head low and left the checkout. Carol turned toward the sofa and said, "That was just a joke. Why would you record something like that?" But my father-in-law turned off the screen with the remote and pulled documents from his bag. He began laying them out on the table one by one. County property records, bank statements, and the ownership transfer documents from the bank. Mike looked at the documents, and his face turned pale. Laura couldn't say anything and just bit her lip. Dan, seeing this content for the first time, looked back and forth between his father and mother in shock. My father-in-law spoke in a quiet but firm voice, "It's not about the money. It's about dividing people like this. Especially in front of my daughter-in-law." The room fell silent. No one could speak first. Carol tried to hold out, but eventually burst into tears. "I was ignored by my in-laws my whole life. So I wanted to protect at least my eldest son." Her voice trembled, and tears ran down her cheeks. My father-in-law took a deep breath, then pulled out another envelope. He carefully placed it in the center of the table and said, "So now, let's rewrite this. This is my will." Everyone's eyes turned to the envelope. Mike slowly reached out and touched the envelope. But he didn't open it. Instead, he looked at my father-in-law and asked, "Dad, did you really have to do this?" My father-in-law nodded. "If I don't do it this way, you'll all carry this problem for the rest of your lives." The dinner ended there. No one ate any more food. The children went to the living room to quietly watch television, and the adults sat at the table in silence. I wasn't afraid of that silence. Rather, I knew it was a necessary silence. A few days passed. My father-in-law made several phone calls and scheduled an appointment with a lawyer. Today was that appointment. Everyone agreed to meet at a small law office near downtown Dallas. At 10 in the morning, I stood with my husband in front of the law firm building. Through the glass door, I could see my father-in-law and Carol already there. The older son's couple was also waiting in the hallway. We took the elevator to the third floor. At the end of the hallway was a small conference room, and the lawyer greeted us. She was a middle-aged female attorney. We shook hands, and everyone sat around a long table. The lawyer opened a file. "Mr. Mitchell, let's review the draft you prepared today." My father-in-law nodded. The lawyer began reading through the document slowly. The rental house was divided equally between the two sons. The savings account was the same, and the ownership of the Addison townhouse where we were currently living would transfer to Dan and me after my father-in-law passed away. I couldn't believe my ears. The lawyer continued explaining, "Mr. Mitchell will continue to reside in this house during his lifetime, and afterward, the ownership will transfer to Dan and Emily." I looked at my father-in-law. He met my eyes. After a long silence, Mike spoke. "Dad, I agree. Honestly, receiving everything would have been a burden for me too." His voice was sincere. Laura made a bitter expression beside him but didn't object further. The lawyer pointed to the signature line. "Please sign here." My father-in-law picked up the pen and slowly wrote his name. Watching him, I felt warmth in my chest. After signing, my father-in-law turned to Carol and asked, "Now, do you have something to say to Emily?" Carol hesitated for a long time, then slowly turned toward me. Carol's hands were trembling. "Emily, I was too harsh. Since you had no family, I should have taken better care of you. But instead I hurt you with that." Her voice was small but sounded sincere. The wound in my heart hadn't fully healed yet, but having my father-in-law stand up for me was enough. I squeezed my father-in-law's hand tightly. "Dad, just having you on my side today, I'll never forget this." When the meeting ended, we took the elevator down. As everyone was leaving in the lobby, Mike came up to me and said, "Emily, I'm sorry." I looked the other way too. I nodded. Before getting in the car, I was organizing my purse when I found the crumpled mall receipt. I was about to throw it away but hesitated. My father-in-law took my hand and said, "Don't throw that away. It's proof that you made it here. Proof that I'm on your side." On the way home, I could see the Texas sky through the car window. Not a cloud in sight, perfectly clear. I touched the receipt in my purse and thought, now I finally have my place in this house. A few days later, it was a quiet afternoon. Sunlight streamed into the dining table at the Addison townhouse. I sat in that light, spreading out the mall receipt and staring at it for a long time. The number $480 was clear. But now that number wasn't just an amount. It was proof of the time I endured, the tears I shed, and the dignity I finally reclaimed. On the back of the receipt was a sentence my father-in-law had written. A person's worth isn't determined by a credit card charge, but by the hand that wipes away tears. I traced the sentence slowly with my finger. No matter how many times I read it, my chest felt warm. All this time, I had thought of myself as worthless. No family, no property, no voice. But now it was different. My father-in-law had stood by my side, and my existence had been acknowledged. In the afternoon, I went out to shop for groceries. I deliberately walked toward the neighborhood grocery store Carol often visited. When I pushed open the door, I smelled the familiar scent. The smell of baking bread mixed with coffee. As I passed the fruit section, I saw Carol. She was putting items in her cart. When she saw me, she smiled awkwardly. "You came." She couldn't speak loudly like before and trailed off carefully. I nodded and greeted her. "Mom." The air between us was still awkward. But at least there was no more public humiliation. No hierarchy, no discrimination. Just a daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. After shopping, I came home. In the kitchen, putting away groceries and looking out the window. The winter sunlight shone warmly. I tucked the receipt inside my diary and made a promise to myself. Never again will I be the daughter-in-law who only stands at the checkout. I'm also a person in this family. I can raise my voice, I can protect my place. Now I knew that. I went to the living room and my father-in-law was sitting on the sofa. He was watching something on his laptop. It was a YouTube video. The title read Inheritance and Wills Seminar for Seniors. My father-in-law muttered, "Better late than never to learn." I sat down next to my father-in-law. "Dad, thank you." My father-in-law shook his head. "This is something I should have done long ago." I squeezed my father-in-law's hand tightly. That hand was rough but warm. Night came. I went out to the balcony and looked down at the lights of suburban Dallas. Lights were on in windows of every house and in the distance. Car lights moved along the highway. If there's anyone out there enduring like I did, I hope they'll stand up for themselves at least once. Silent endurance isn't a virtue, I now know. Sometimes you have to fight, keep evidence, find someone on your side. I took out the receipt from my pocket again. $480, Plano Premium Mall. The tears that started at the mall. That day eventually came back as support for me. Injustice became evidence, silence became voice, endurance became change. I looked at the unfolded receipt and smiled. This was the true value of family I learned late in Texas. Not the credit card charge, but who wipes away your tears. That's what family really means. A wind blew. Cold but refreshing. I held the receipt to my chest and went back inside. In the living room, my father-in-law was still sitting, and from the kitchen came the sound of running water from dishwashing. I put the receipt down on the dining table and looked at it one last time. It was just a small piece of paper, but it was proof that changed my life. And I knew it would continue to protect me. That night, I wrote a line in my diary. From today, I am not the daughter-in-law who only stands at the checkout. I am a person with my place. I put down the pen and looked outside. In the Texas night sky, stars were twinkling. Everyone, have you ever been hurt by your own family the way I was? Through this experience, I learned that before money, what we must protect first are our own dignity. And at least one person who truly stands on our side. I realized it late, but courage and hope to stand up again were still in my hands. If you have been through something similar, I would be grateful if you could gently share your story in the comments. I believe that your courage will become a deep comfort to someone else. If today's story stayed with you, please walk this road with me by subscribing and liking. And if someone comes to mind, quietly share this video with them. Thank you sincerely for listening to the end. And I truly hope your tomorrow will be a little warmer and healthier.